Jax's revenge domain. When Kimberly raised her glass and said Oliver's name instead of mine, I felt something die inside me. Not anger, something colder. I'd just spent 14 hours a day for 3 months making sure her quarterly infrastructure review wouldn't be a disaster. Oliver couldn't even spell Docker correctly in his emails. Everyone clapped. I stood there with plastic wraps stuck to my wrist from boxing up the leftover celebration cake, smiling like a damn prop while my 9 years of expertise got handed to a 26-year-old analyst who thought AWS was just fancy cloud stuff. Let me back up. I'm Patrick, 47 years old, and I've been the senior infrastructure director at this tech firm for 9 years. My wife Rachel always said I cared too much about work. Turns out she was right, but not in the way she meant. I'd burned those 14-hour days, skipped my son Lucas's college graduation ceremony, even missed my nephew's championship Little League game for this infrastructure rollout, the one that was supposed to modernize our entire payment gateway and security protocols. The one that would have crashed and burned without someone who actually understood SSL certificate chains and API authentication flows. But when promotion time came, Kimberly chose fresh-faced Oliver, the kid who asked in our last team meeting if Docker was just fancy virtualization, the same kid who needed me to walk him through basic firewall configurations. Oliver, who had an MBA and exactly 18 months of actual technical experience. I drove home that night in silence. Not even my usual classic rock playlist, just the sound of my blinker ticking like a slow, sarcastic metronome. Got home, kissed Rachel goodnight, and did what any rational infrastructure director would do. I opened my laptop and started planning. First, I checked the org chart again, searched for my name. Nothing. I wasn't even listed under key contributors for the project I'd essentially architected single-handedly. Then I opened our Slack archive, pulled up the thread where Kimberly had written, "Couldn't have done this without you, Patrick. That was 3 weeks ago." Then I looked up the timestamp on when the new roles were finalized. 2 days later. She knew. She'd already made her decision while I was pulling 16-hour shifts to save her quarterly numbers. I'd been with this company for 9 years. 9. I'd watched 3 full reorganizations, survived 2 acquisition attempts, and even volunteered to relocate to Austin for a year to fix a regional infrastructure meltdown that was hemorrhaging money. I never missed a deadline, never dropped the ball, never asked for glory. I just showed up and made other people look competent. Kimberly once told me I was the backbone that keeps this place running. Apparently, she meant the kind they eventually replace with something shinier and cheaper. But here's the thing about being the backbone for 9 years. You know exactly where all the pressure points are. I didn't get angry, didn't slam anything, didn't send passive-aggressive emails. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of bourbon, and opened a new document titled Exit Strategy. 5 bullets, no feelings, just facts. Because when you've been holding up the infrastructure for nearly a decade, you understand systems, and every system has dependencies. The Monday after the celebration and corporate theater, I emailed HR saying I needed a few days to decompress after the high-stress delivery cycle. They approved it within an hour, probably assuming I'd come back refreshed and ready to train Oliver on systems I'd built from scratch. Poor assumption. Instead, I started building my parachute. I made a pot of coffee, opened a blank document, and began mapping out the anatomy of my departure like it was a project plan. Because that's exactly what it was. I listed every system I personally maintained, every vendor who had my direct contact information, every undocumented workaround I'd implemented to prevent critical failures during Q4 when leadership refused to approve additional resources. The SSL certificates I manually renewed every 90 days, the API keys that were tied to my personal authentication tokens, the backup procedures that existed only in my head because documentation takes too much time. By day 2, I had something that looked like a disaster recovery plan for a company post-cyber attack, except the breach was going to be my absence. I didn't want revenge, not the petty burn everything down kind of revenge. I wanted consequence, the kind you can't negotiate with or sweet talk away, the kind that shows up in quarterly reports and vendor SLA violations. I wanted Kimberly to see exactly what she'd thrown away, wrapped in a bow of impeccable documentation and bulletproof professionalism. I compiled the most comprehensive turnover document in corporate history, annotated screenshots of every critical system, Inline documentation links for procedures I'd been promising to write down for years. A 90-day calendar timeline with system maintenance alerts flagged in red. I even included a detailed guide explaining which contractors were most likely to vanish if they weren't handled with exactly the right combination of technical respect and financial incentives. Hint: both of them would disappear the moment they realized there was no senior engineer backing them up. Then came my masterpiece, a resignation letter so professional it could have been used as a template in business school. I thanked the company for the growth opportunities. I wished the team continued success. I expressed genuine gratitude for all I'd learned about enterprise infrastructure and team leadership. And then, buried in the final paragraph like a time bomb wrapped in courtesy, I attached a hyperlink to Clause 7.4b from my contract amendment. The clause Kimberly had approved and forgotten about. Clause 7.4b was born in a conference room with flickering fluorescent lights and a dried-out marker I had to shake just to finish signing. Last year, when they asked me to extend my role another 18 months without a promotion, I pushed back. Not loudly, not dramatically, surgically. I didn't ask for more money. I didn't demand a better title. I asked for one simple addition to my contract: legal protection if I ever decided to leave. It was framed as a standard safety net for senior technical roles. If I resign with full compliance documentation and proper turnover procedures, the clause read, any operational disruptions occurring after 48 hours are the company's responsibility, not the departing employees. Kimberly nodded like she understood exactly what I meant, but I could see her eyes glazing over at the legal terminology. She signed it without reading the fine print. Classic manager move. They love the idea of accountability until they have to be accountable. The clause sat dormant for months, collecting digital dust in the HR filing system, until now, when I submitted my resignation. At 7:58 a.m. that Monday morning, the countdown timer started. 48 hours. 2 business days to either properly reassign everything I managed or accept full responsibility for whatever came next. And based on the fact that my name was still listed as primary contact on every critical system, I knew they hadn't reassigned a damn thing. At 8:04 a.m., I got an email from Kimberly with the subject line, "Wait, what?" No punctuation, no professional greeting, just a manager realizing she'd been driving without checking if there was gas in the tank. I didn't reply. I wasn't angry anymore. I was efficient. See, the funny thing about legal language is that people either weaponize it or completely ignore it. Kimberly was definitely the latter. Her attention span for anything involving compliance or indemnification was about as long as Oliver's understanding of network security protocols. I'd counted on that when I buried my insurance policy in subsection 7.4b. Kimberly's first instinct was to forward my resignation to the legal department. Standard panic response. They responded within an hour with a scanned copy of my signed contract amendment, highlighted in yellow, with Kimberly's own signature at the bottom. I can picture her face when she saw it. That nervous little laugh she does when she realizes she just walked into a trap that was set months in advance. She didn't make any public announcements, but the silence was telling. Normally, when someone left, there would be a company-wide farewell message about wishing them well on their next adventure. For me, nothing. Not even a reply, all acknowledgement. Just a vacuum where professional courtesy should have been. I didn't care because I wasn't their employee anymore. What made it beautiful was that I'd followed every protocol by the book. There wasn't a single corner cut, no vindictive shortcuts. My turnover documentation could have been published as a best practices guide. Every SSL certificate expiration date was documented. Every vendor escalation path was mapped out. Every maintenance schedule I personally managed had detailed notes with timestamps and backup procedures. They had the blueprints, they just didn't have an engineer anymore. And according to Clause 7.4b, I didn't owe them one more minute of my expertise. Kimberly probably thought I'd fold, that I'd feel guilty about walking away with all those critical systems hanging in the balance, that some vestige of company loyalty would kick in and I'd offer a few transition days just to keep things running smoothly. But that's the fundamental problem with managers like Kimberly. They confuse loyalty with dependency. Those are two completely different things. Loyalty is earned through recognition and respect. Dependency is what happens when you let one person become irreplaceable because it's easier than building proper systems. For 9 years, they'd chosen dependency over investment. Now they were about to learn the difference. It took exactly 47 hours and 18 minutes for the first red warning light to appear on the infrastructure monitoring dashboard. The SSL certificate for our primary payment gateway, the one I'd been manually renewing every 90 days because automation takes too long to implement, quietly expired at 11:47 p.m. on Tuesday night. By 9:30 Wednesday morning, half our API integrations were throwing authentication errors. The Slack channel labeled System Alerts suddenly had 12 new threads and counting. Messages like, "Is the Stripe connection down for anyone else?" And PayPal Gateway returning 403 errors. Is this related to Patrick's transition? I wasn't there to read them, but Jeremy from the network team, one of the few guys who actually understood what I did, screenshotted some highlights for me. The panic was starting to spread from technical channels into management threads. No one knew how to fix it because the guy they were bringing in to absorb Patrick's responsibilities hadn't even started yet, still waiting on his security clearance, hadn't received his access badges, didn't have admin privileges for the certificate management system, the vendor API dashboards, or the backup authentication servers. They'd scheduled his welcome lunch before they'd scheduled his system access. But sure, that was definitely my emergency to solve. At 10:22 a.m., my phone buzzed with an email from Kimberly. Subject line, quick question. The audacity was almost impressive. Hey Patrick, weird situation. Any chance you remember the backup authentication token for the payment gateway? Looks like something might have expired overnight. I stared at that message for a full minute, not because I was angry, but because it was such perfect validation of everything I'd predicted. Kimberly, in full crisis mode, still couldn't bring herself to admit she needed me. It was just a quick question about a weird situation. I opened my sent folder and found the exact line I'd written in my resignation letter buried on page 4 under the compliance section. All authentication credentials, renewal schedules, and system access procedures are documented in Appendix D per Contractual Clause 7.4b. I am not authorized to provide additional technical support following accepted resignation. I copied that response word for word and hit send. No, hi Kimberly, no hope. This helps. Just the clause, just the rules, just the professional boundary I'd drawn in black ink 18 months ago. She didn't reply. But 2 hours later, I got a LinkedIn message from Michelle, a mid-level project manager I barely knew. Hey Patrick, not sure if you've heard, but we're having some technical difficulties. Kimberly says it's just a temporary glitch. Temporary glitch. That's what they always call it until the revenue stream stops flowing and the compliance auditors start asking questions. But by then, it's not a glitch anymore. It's a mirror showing them exactly what they'd been ignoring while I kept everything running behind the scenes. The quarterly vendor demonstration was scheduled for 11 a.m. sharp that Thursday. A critical presentation to 2 major partners worth a combined $2.8 million in annual contracts. CloudSync Systems and DataBridge Solutions, both companies I'd been working with for over 3 years to build custom API integrations that made their services seamlessly connect with our infrastructure. Kimberly had been promoting this demo for weeks. We'll use this to lock in the contract renewals and discuss expansion opportunities, she announced during our last team meeting. This infrastructure team is ready to showcase what we've built. By infrastructure team, she meant whoever was left after I walked away. They canceled the demo 18 minutes before start time. The first vendor rep, Jessica from CloudSync, sent me a confused email afterward. Hey Patrick, we heard there were some technical issues at your company today. Everything okay? We were looking forward to seeing the new monitoring dashboard you mentioned, that monitoring dashboard, the one I'd spent 6 months custom building to display real-time performance metrics across both vendor platforms, the one that required my personal API credentials to authenticate with their systems, the one that Oliver probably couldn't even pronounce correctly, let alone operate. I didn't reply to Jessica, but I knew what she was really asking. Where's the guy who usually runs these technical presentations while the managers nod and take notes? What Kimberly either forgot or never understood was that our vendor contracts weren't built around optional showcases. They were structured around mandatory technical demonstrations with specific performance benchmarks. The contract language was crystal clear. Quarterly system integration reviews must be conducted by the designated infrastructure architect on record, with live demonstration of agreed-upon functionality metrics. That designated architect? My name, my credentials, my personal responsibility. It wasn't ego that put my name in that contract. It was architecture. When we first negotiated these deals 3 years ago, I insisted on direct accountability. They need to see that someone with actual technical authority is committed to making this work, I told our legal team. Kimberly had smiled and called it excellent relationship management. Now that relationship management clause was a time bomb with a 48-hour fuse. Word started trickling through back channels. Jeremy messaged me on his personal phone asking if I knew how to reset the vendor authentication portals. A junior engineer posted in a private Discord server we'd set up asking if anyone remembered the backup procedures for the API monitoring systems. They didn't. Even if they'd somehow gained access, the integration pipelines were built on custom scripts I'd written over years of trial and error. The monitoring dashboards that tracked system performance were authenticated through tokens tied to my personal developer accounts. The automated backup processes that prevented data loss during peak traffic were scheduled through jobs that expired along with my company access. No shortcuts, no workarounds, no amount of panicked troubleshooting could replace 3 years of relationship building and technical implementation. I spent that Thursday morning on my back deck with my laptop open, drinking coffee while watching their crisis unfold through digital breadcrumbs, vendor notifications about failed connection attempts, Slack messages about temporary authentication issues, calendar invites marked urgent infrastructure review, alternative solutions needed. There weren't any alternative solutions, and the beautiful part was, none of this had to happen. If they'd planned my transition properly, followed the documentation I'd provided, or even kept me involved long enough to properly hand off the vendor relationships, that demo would have gone perfectly. The contracts would have renewed. Kimberly would have taken credit for seamless infrastructure management. Instead, radio silence from 2 major partners who were probably questioning whether our company could deliver on its technical commitments. Systems don't care about office politics or promotion decisions. They just care about whether the person with the right credentials shows up when needed. And for the first time in 9 years, that person wasn't there. Kimberly always had a talent for packaging disasters in corporate speak. The company-wide email she sent that afternoon was a masterpiece of deflection. We're currently conducting scheduled maintenance on several infrastructure components and appreciate your patience during this optimization period. Updates will be provided as work progresses. Scheduled maintenance. Optimization period. The email read like something a PR firm would write after a data breach, all euphemisms and reassuring language that said absolutely nothing about the actual situation. But Kimberly made one critical mistake with that mass email. She sent it company-wide, which meant it went to everyone, including people who knew exactly what was really happening. 3 minutes after her message hit everyone's inbox, a back-end engineer accidentally replied, all with a simple question. Anyone know how to access the SSL Certificate Management Console? That was followed by a junior developer asking, or the vendor API dashboard. I think it was tied to Patrick's login credentials. The thread exploded from there. A security analyst wanted to know about firewall configuration backups. Someone from compliance asked about the automated audit reporting system. Another person mentioned that the payment gateway monitoring was showing red alerts across all status indicators. Then came the message that made everything crystal clear. Someone from finance, probably not realizing they were replying to the entire company. Do we have updated authorization for the vendor payment processing queue? The quarterly disbursements are quarterly. Scheduled for tomorrow. All visible, all time-stamped, all creating a digital paper trail that showed exactly how unprepared they were for my absence. The replies stopped after that, but the damage was done. Not technical damage, legal damage, because someone in the compliance department, bless their clipboard-carrying souls, was monitoring company communications for risk indicators related to infrastructure disruptions, and according to Clause 7.4b, if unresolved system dependencies triggered post-departure operational failures, an internal liability assessment had to be filed within 10 business days. The clause wasn't just protective language for me, it was a spotlight aimed directly at management decisions. I imagined the compliance team sitting in their quiet corner office, reading those reply all messages like breadcrumbs leading straight back to Kimberly's desk. They didn't need to investigate. The engineering team had documented the crisis in real time publicly with timestamps. Meanwhile, I said nothing. Didn't reply to the chaos, didn't forward screenshots to former colleagues, didn't post anything on social media. I just saved the email thread in a folder labeled Operational Failure Documentation. Insurance, in case anyone tried to rewrite history later. And Kimberly? She went silent. No follow-up emails. No damage control messages. Her corporate communications stopped completely, probably because legal had advised her that anything she said could end up in that liability assessment. 3 days after the system failures reached critical mass, the panic finally breached the firewall of procurement. I got a voicemail at 6:51 p.m. on Friday, prime ignore everything time. It was Amanda from vendor management, her voice carrying that special tension reserved for people who just realized their quarterly numbers were about to evaporate. Hi, Patrick. We've flagged 2 major deliverables as non-compliant and potentially exposing us to significant financial penalties. Could you call us back as soon as possible? Translation: the money is disappearing and we have no idea how to stop the bleeding. Those 2 deliverables were the foundation of our largest vendor contracts. CloudSync required monthly system integration reports generated through the monitoring dashboard I'd built. DataBridge needed quarterly performance certifications that could only be produced through API calls authenticated with my personal developer credentials. Both contracts had penalty clauses that made payments contingent on verified system functionality within specific timeframes. Miss the deadline, lose the money. Miss it by more than 10 days, pay financial penalties for breach of technical commitments. No access, no verification, no money, and potentially significant penalties for failing to meet contractual obligations. But that wasn't what made the situation truly expensive. It was the letter that arrived Monday morning from CloudSync's legal department, delivered via certified mail to our corporate office. If system integration reporting requirements are not fulfilled and compliance demonstrated by end of business. Wednesday, we will invoke Clause 12.7c regarding technical delivery failures and pursue contractual remedies, including payment recovery. In plain English, deliver what you promised or pay us back everything we've paid you this year, plus penalties. Kimberly tried calling me directly that afternoon, 3 times. Left voicemails that started professional and got progressively more desperate. By the 3rd message, she'd dropped the corporate speak entirely. Patrick, I know things didn't end well, but we really need to talk. There might be some opportunities to work together on this transition. I didn't pick up. I didn't need to because by Tuesday morning my consulting firm had already responded with a formal service proposal. Sullivan Infrastructure Solutions, LLC. 3 pages of letterhead, detailed scope of work and emergency system recovery pricing. $145,000 for 5 days of on-site infrastructure restoration and vendor relationship management. Payment due upfront, non-negotiable. I'd spent Sunday evening researching market rates for emergency technical consulting. Senior infrastructure architects with vendor relationship expertise and security clearances bill between $1,500 and $4,000 per day for crisis recovery work. At $145,000 for 5 days, I was pricing myself at the higher end but within market range. More importantly, it was exactly what emergency infrastructure recovery costs when you fire the only person who knows how everything works. They didn't reply immediately. Pride is expensive medicine, and Kimberly probably spent 48 hours trying every possible workaround, calling former contractors who'd worked with me, reaching out to vendor technical support teams who politely explained they could only work with the designated account administrator, asking Oliver to figure out systems he'd never seen before. But every hour of delay made the situation more expensive. CloudSync's deadline was Wednesday. DataBridge's quarterly certification was due Thursday. Each missed deadline triggered escalating financial penalties that made my consulting fee look like pocket change. Wednesday afternoon, I got the call. Not from Kimberly, from Amanda in procurement, probably because legal had advised against letting the manager who created this mess handle the negotiations. Patrick, we'd like to discuss your consulting proposal. Would you be available for a brief conversation? Brief conversation. As if 9 years of institutional knowledge could be reconstructed in a phone call. I explained that my current client commitments would require a 2-week delay before I could take on new projects, unless, of course, they wanted to discuss expedited rates for immediate availability. Expedited rates, $195,000. Take it or leave it. They took it. The final irony came 6 months later, buried on page 12 of the company's updated employee handbook. Section 7. Transition Management Protocols. All senior technical role transitions must follow documented handover procedures per Clause 7.4b compliance requirements. No attribution, no explanation, just a sterile sentence in corporate Arial, nestled between vacation policies and expense reporting guidelines. The clause I'd negotiated in that flickering conference room had become permanent company policy. Now every new hire gets trained on proper transition documentation. Every departure requires detailed system handover procedures. Every manager learns about the legal implications of inadequate succession planning. I imagine some fresh MBA reading that policy during orientation, thinking it's just another bureaucratic requirement, not knowing it came from a guy who walked away without drama, without burning bridges, just executing perfect professional separation. They can update their org charts, rebrand their office spaces, hire consultants to rebuild what I used to maintain. But they can't erase the lesson I taught them about the difference between loyalty and dependency. Some of us don't make noise when we go. We just leave the blueprint behind, built into the system itself, permanent as infrastructure. And sometimes, that's the most lasting victory of all.